Hello everyone, welcome into my forecast video, fall winter 2025-2026. So in celebration of 40,000 subscribers, thanks to each and every one of you for your support and dedication. I really appreciate it. And we look forward to giving back in terms of these sorts of videos and educational related videos at your request, of course. All of this will be coming from you, whatever you would like to see. In celebration of that, I present to you my first video forecast. So this sort of forecast was actually released in written form back on September 22nd. So the link to that written version is provided in the video description below, so feel free to check on that. Stick around because I will be providing a first look at what we could expect for spring and summer 2026. So this is already written. I don't change these forecasts altogether, so whatever is written in September, it stays that way for a year. So in the meantime, let's get right into what we could expect for this fall winter, the month-to-month breakdowns as well in terms of precipitation, temperature, etc. Fall winter 2025-2026. Okay, so this is referring to sea surface temperatures. So this plot shows a sea surface temperature anomaly specifically. So anything in yellow to red represents above normal, anything in blue represents below normal or cooler than normal. So this is a good example of cooler than normal, whereas warmer than normal can be this area here. This is a good example. So that's pretty much what this plot is showing us in terms of global sea surface temperatures. Now, I mentioned the blue area because this is what we know as a La Nina. Last year, there were many talks of La Nina developing, but La Nina itself never technically did appear. It's looking like we will actually get La Nina this time, but it has yet to be seen if it will actually become a weak La Nina. Specifically over North America, when we have cooler than normal sea surface temperatures in the tropical equatorial Pacific, it does cause a ridge, sort of a ridging pattern over western North America, followed by a trough towards central to eastern North America. As you see here, it's probably not the best example. I can just do something more like this. So that is sort of your standard La Nina polar jet stream configuration. And the southern portion of the jet stream, the subtropical jet stream, tends to follow a more zonal sort of flow. And turning our attention to the Gulf of Alaska, notice how the waters are generally warmer than normal here. So when it's warmer than normal, you tend to have a sort of a ridging kind of pattern that tends to be favored. But during La Nina events, we also have a tendency of cooling the Gulf of Alaska waters, and we've been actually seeing that cooling trend. So we can look at that weekly pattern, a recent weekly trend. So let's look at the last 7 days relative to October 11th. And indeed, you can see that there is a cooling regime in the Gulf of Alaska. So anywhere from about half a degree Celsius to almost 1.5 degrees Celsius, we are seeing this pattern unfold in the zone. So this cooling pattern that we're seeing, and that is consistent with a La Nina. So if that is to be the case, then it's more likely to result in less of a ridging pattern in this zone, and instead it might help to feature a troughing sort of pattern in the zone. So this is an animation of global sea surface temperatures, so it helps us to better visualize where cooling is unfolding and where warming is unfolding. So firstly, let's look at the equatorial Pacific, and you can see those cooler temperatures starting to appear from the eastern equatorial Pacific and spreading west. So that is signature of a possible La Nina. So we still have to see if this will actually become a technical La Nina. And then going farther north, as we would expect, the Gulf of Alaska is warmer than normal, but it is also becoming less warmer than normal. So there has been a prominent cooling there over the last 12 weeks. So I think another zone to really pay attention to here would be the North Atlantic. Notice these little patches of blue, so that could indicate some cooling that's occurring in the North Atlantic. So if we go back to our coral reef sort of plot in this direction, so we can actually gauge if there has been some notable cooling in the North Atlantic, much like in the Gulf of Alaska as we saw before. But we are actually indeed seeing some cooling taking place over the last week or so relative to October 11th. So what this could imply is less ridging in the zone, and instead you have more troughing in the zone. So that would improve the chance for a warmer pattern across eastern North America rather than having that trough that I think will stay mostly in central North America spread farther east. Okay, so turning our attention to the quasi-biennial oscillation, the QBO. So you don't need to know exactly what this refers to other than it just based on anomalies in the wind fields in the stratosphere from upper portions of the stratosphere to lower portions of the stratosphere. So just to get our bearings in this plot. So this is the upper portions of the stratosphere, and towards here are the lower portions of the stratosphere. And you can see how these wind fields, they descend into the lower portions of the stratosphere, whether it's a westerly phase, so this is a westerly phase, or an easterly phase in which we see a reversal in the normal westerly flow. So here's your easterly phase, right? So this is, it's normal to see both. I mean, they alternate between both phases, the westerly phase, the easterly phase. So right now we are going into an easterly phase. You can see that blue descending towards this portion of the year in September 2025. So that's where we are in this time series. So it runs from 2023 to about present day. And we are, as you can probably tell, going into an easterly phase, a negative phase, as we go into the latter portion of fall into winter. So what does this really all mean? So when we go into an easterly phase, we tend to have blocking in the North Atlantic in terms of the North Atlantic Oscillation trending towards a negative phase as well, correspondingly, and the Arctic Oscillation as well. Since the North Atlantic and Arctic oscillations are related, they tend to follow the same pattern. Okay, and just very quickly looking at the NAO, so this is since June, and now we are at October, so middle of October, and you can see the trend is towards a negative phase right now. But despite the phase of the QBO in a negative phase, as I showed previously, I do think that this winter we will generally see a mildly positive sort of NAO. In relation to that, this is the AO now, the Arctic Oscillation. So I just showed the North Atlantic Oscillation. In this case, we do see a more positive trend that's taking place currently as we go towards the end of October into November. I do think that we will stay modestly positive as we go into the winter months. So that could hint at less blocking in the North Atlantic. One other thing that I'd like to mention is the PDO. So just like other oscillations, we have negative and positive phases, right? So in this case, we are clearly in a negative phase, pretty strongly negative phase right now in the PDO, with respect to the PDO, the Pacific Decadal Oscillation. So this goes all the way back to January 1854, so that's when the observational period began, and we are working our way all the way to the present day, and we are clearly in a negative phase. And that does lend support to the idea of cooling in the Gulf of Alaska and therefore more troughing than ridging. So overall, this is how I envision the polar jet stream to appear from November 15th to March 20th. So essentially the latter portion of fall throughout the winter proper. So that doesn't mean that this is how the jet stream will look every single day from November 15th to March 20th, but the overall configuration will look something like this. Now, firstly, I do have this ridge that's taking place over the Gulf of Alaska. It's a bit counterintuitive to what I was mentioning before because of my belief that the PDO will largely stay negative as we go forward. So pretty much an extension of what we've already been seeing. And meanwhile, the sea surface temperatures in the Gulf of Alaska would be cooling. So they are above normal right now, but they will be trending less above normal as we go forward. But I do believe that they will stay warm enough. Now, correspondingly, we will also have this trough. So this prominent trough descending into central Canada, into the central contiguous United States. And at times this could be fairly invasive into the deep south. So this Arctic blast, or some of these Arctic blasts can penetrate farther south, I think, this winter, like we saw in December 2022, February 2023, and more recently in January 2024. So that could be a situation to monitor, I think, going into especially January and February 2026. Now, where this jet stream is able to penetrate farther south to southeast, we also have that subtropical jet stream that's doing something like this or a little bit farther north. So I'll just do something more like this. So I think the subtropical jet stream will often meet this portion of the polar jet stream, and this will be a zone of higher energy, obviously, where these two jet streams will meet. So that is why I have this letter L drawn in here. This is to represent areas of low pressure, often intense areas of low pressure, mostly in the form of Texas lows, and occasionally I think we'll have these lows that will spin off the southeast coast into the Atlantic, where these can evolve very quickly into nor'easters because the waters in just off the east coast are still well warmer than normal. I believe they will stay well warmer than normal as we go into the later fall and winters. So this could be a zone to watch for significant cyclogenesis. So I think in the Northeast, so you probably noticed already that I put an active storm track across the east. So at the eastern fringe of the polar jet stream, this will be a zone to monitor because of frequent low pressure systems, or there would be a higher potential for more snowfall, higher than average snowfall across portions of the Midwest, the Northeast, southern Ontario to southern Quebec, and a portion of the Maritimes as well. So I do expect this zone to be snowier than normal, slightly snowier than normal or wetter than normal, for this later fall to winter. So there could also be a sizable number of icing events as well, depending on how these systems travel. So if they are allowed to travel in a certain way, we could invite more freezing rain episodes as well after initial snowfall. So that's also to be monitored. Now, in the east itself, apart from the active storm track, I do believe this will be a zone where we won't see particularly harsh cold, mostly because of the active storm track itself. So this zone will be subject to higher amounts of cloud coverage. And with higher amounts of cloud coverage, that will help to moderate how cold it does get, especially at nighttime. So in this zone, I think our minimum temperatures will be more moderated by the cloud cover. So it's overall a gloomy sort of fall to winter altogether, as we've been seeing in recent years as well. So we also have this high pressure zone, so it's acting a bit like a Bermuda high that will help to steer warmth up into the northeast and help to bulge this jet stream into a little bit of a ridge, a southeast ridge. Florida itself and much of the southeast could see an active storm track as well, so this could lead to a severe weather situation, more rounds of severe thunderstorms getting into these regions during the winter months. So that will also be something to watch. Most of the cold ultimately will be locked into the central portion of the continent. One thing I didn't mention is this high pressure zone to the north, northern Quebec into Baffin Island and parts of Greenland. So this will act as this sort of blocking feature that will keep the worst of the cold farther west, I think. Now, that doesn't mean that the east is immune to bitter cold. I do believe that some of this cold will find its way into the northeast, much more than what we saw last winter. But overall, we are seeing this sort of shield that is unfolding to the north as well to help bottle up or anchor that cold farther west. So this will act as a barrier to the east. This cold, as far as the east is concerned, it will be able to sneak, I think, a little bit of southwest Ontario and parts of the Midwest, most likely, as compared to farther northeast of there and east of there towards the eastern seaboards, especially cold Arctic outbreaks associated with polar vortex displacements. To monitor, I don't think, again, it'll be like a harshly cold winter in general, even though the central portion of the continent will be facing that more likely than the east. Okay, so using the Montreal area as our reference point for the Northeast and Upper Midwest. So for October, I expect it to trend warmer and drier than normal. And this has actually been the case already so far into this month. So we are almost exactly halfway at the time of this posting. And one thunderstorm day will be possible in the Montreal area, at least one thunderstorm day. This has actually already been satisfied. And in terms of November, I do expect this to follow October's example, so trending a little bit less warmer than normal, but still warmer than normal nonetheless, and with below average snowfall. And again, one thunderstorm day at least will be possible. So for December, again, slightly warmer than normal, along with near normal snowfall. And then going into January, we do see a reversal in the pattern towards the east, mostly because of that Arctic air starting to infiltrate the eastern portion of the continent a little bit more regularly. So I think this will help to govern a slightly cooler than normal pattern. So nothing too spectacularly cold, but still one of the colder Januaries, I think, in recent years. Most likely the coldest one since 2022's very cold January. Snowfall correspondingly, I think, will go above average. Now for February, it's pretty much a replica of what January will do, so slightly cooler than normal, along with slightly above average snowfalls. And finally, for March, I do expect it to trend slightly warmer than normal, so this may hint at a slightly early onset of consistent spring weather. So that is actually quite possible. And snowfall for the month of March altogether, I think, will trend near normal. Now, for some specifics for the Montreal area, the Island of Montreal, around the airport, even more specifically. So I think the coldest periods will be mostly November 2nd to November 5th. November 19th to the 23rd, November 28th. Keep in mind this is all the coldest periods relative to normal. Also December 1st, December 5th, and roughly the end of January and going into early February, following a possible sudden stratospheric warming event that would occur earlier in the month of January. And then going into even more specifics for the island of Montreal, I do expect 11 to 14 days being spent with temperatures of minus 20 Celsius or colder. That's about -4 Fahrenheit. So this is specifically at the airport. And keep in mind, this does not include wind chill. I also expect a total of 217 to 236 centimeters of snowfall. So this is total snowfall again, from October to April. So this is the equivalent of 84 to 93 inches. As part of this, I do also envision 3 to 4 significant snowfall events. Those are defined as, in my outlooks anyway, as events that are 15 centimeters at least of snowfall over their duration, or November to April. One of these, I think, will be able to achieve 35 centimeters of total snowfall over its duration. That's about 14 inches. And there will also be an increase in freezing rain events, freezing drizzle events that we've, compared to what we've been seeing in recent winters. So there will be an increase in those. Also, more limited opportunity to melt ground snow this winter since we will have a colder tendency altogether for especially January and February. So it does indicate a more tenacious snowpack. Okay, so just as a preview for spring and summer 2026, I'm not going to share in-depth details for this, but in the meantime, I will share this much. So overall, this is the configuration, the jet stream configuration that I envision. So you might see quite a bit of similarities with the winter jet stream configuration that I shared before, but I do think this will stick around for much of the spring and summer. So in a nutshell, I do expect really most of the continent to follow a warmer than normal pattern. Some areas drier than normal, others wetter than normal. I do think the Northeast, the Midwest, and much of the Southeast will follow a wetter than normal pattern going into spring and summer of next year, 2026. So the upcoming spring summer. So we will have this Bermuda high, I think, will be firmly placed in the Atlantic and will be helping to steer a lot of warmth up to the Northeast. But unlike the last 2 years, I don't expect the Northeast, Ontario, Quebec, and much of the Midwest to be quite as warm as what we saw the last couple of summers. So this will be a representation of a cooler pattern, although it's still warmer than normal. It will be stickier or humid, more humid than normal in this region as well, and stormier than normal. So quite a bit stormier than what we saw in 2025. And I do think the central portion of the continent will continue to hold on to somewhat cooler than normal conditions as cooler air. So a more persistent troughing pattern, I think, will be present there to help govern that sort of pattern. And then farther west, including the western contiguous US and western Canada, I think will follow a hotter and drier than normal pattern. So ultimately, that is what I envision for spring summer 2026. I will be presenting more details in a separate video for this, so stay tuned for that. That will be coming up soon. And meanwhile, I just want to provide my heartfelt thanks once again for your attention, not just for this video, but for all the videos that I have posted so far, shorts and long form videos. I really appreciate it. And once again, without you, this channel wouldn't be where it is now. So we have reached over 40,000 subscribers for this channel, and I just want to provide a huge thank you. Once again, many, many thanks, each and every one of you, for your dedication, long-term support, and everything else good in between. So thank you so much, and I will see you in the next video, and we will continue to bring you more of these.